There's a
Try
button.
talking into it.
There's a button down here.
I don't think so.
Hello? 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 This is for us kids, Mom. You've had such an interesting life, and you've always told us such funny stories that I decided I wanted a record of it. So I'm going to start asking you a few questions and see if you can answer like you normally do. I first want to ask you about your childhood years and growing up as an only child, and about your parents and your sister Faith and Uncle Will, and if you knew anything about your grandparents.
I was born April 8th, 1922, when my sister was 18 years old. And I was quite a surprise for my mother. She thought she was too old to have me at 41. And probably when I was about a year old, they found out that my sister had tuberculosis. So Aunt Mina took me and took care of me. And Jean, her daughter, was my cousin, was 4 months older than I was. So she had the two of us in the bathtub together and two of us in the buggy together. And then my sister died when I was 2 years old. And I don't remember Faith. But when I was 3 years old, Mommy took me down to Texas to visit her friend Aunt Mercedes. And we stayed down there a couple of months. I guess Mommy had to just get away for a while. And I remember them telling me that Santa Claus came on a reindeer down there, or came on a reindeer. He didn't have a sled, or he came in an airplane rather, because he didn't have a sled there. They didn't have any snow. And then when I was 4 years old, my daddy decided he wanted to go down to Florida and see about investing in property down there. So we rented our home and we went down to Florida to live. And we only stayed about 6 months because Mommy couldn't take all the cockroaches. I remember they were so big I thought they were birds. They'd be up on the drapes. And we put kerosene in the legs of the table so they wouldn't crawl up on the table. And I remember Daddy bringing me home a little baby alligator and putting him in a big pail of water one time. And that was when I got a doll, and I was looking forward to having a doll, and Daddy got me one, and its eyes didn't open and shut. And I remember that's the first time I was disappointed in getting a doll, because I was old enough to have one whose eyes opened and shut. Then we came back to Berwyn again. And let's see, we stayed with Auntie Grace for, I guess when I was 4 years old, we stayed with Auntie Grace. And I remember I thought that I was going to stay that size the rest of my life. I was always going to be 4 years old, but we stayed there long enough that I realized that the little railing I put my hairbrush on was getting lower for me, and I was really going to grow up. And I remember how surprised I was. And then we got an apartment on Oak Park Avenue, and I stayed there until I was 8 years old. And we went back to our home. Then Mommy and Daddy had rented that out all this time.
I want to interrupt you just for a minute,
Okay,
Mom.
honey.
I wanted to find out about your dad and your mom and their names and their grandparents.
Oh, okay. Daddy was born in St. Thomas, Ontario, and he came to the United States when he was 9 years old, and he started working at that time. And I remember he had to give Grandma all of his money, And he said if he wanted any money at all of his own, he had to just ask her if he could please have just a little bit of the money to spend. And he had two brothers and a sister. The sister had died, and he had a younger brother, Jim, who died, and then there was just Uncle Warner and my daddy, Will Putnam. And then he worked for the railroad, for the Burlington Railroad all of his life.
How far did he go to school?
He only went through a school till third grade.
And what about your mom?
And Mummy came when she was 6 months old. She came from Germany, and she went through 8th grade.
Do you know where in Germany she's from?
I have no idea. I don't know about any relatives in Germany. Probably have some, but I don't know anything really about my past.
But it was your mom's mom that lived with you, right?
No, it was Daddy's
Oh, it was
mom.
Dad's mom.
Grandma Rachel. That was my dad's mother. She was crippled, and she was had used crutches, and she lived with us for quite a long time.
How did you get along with her?
Well, Grandma was very religious, and I don't remember her ever putting her arm around me or telling me that she loved me, but she'd get out her Bible and tell me what a sinner I was. And because Mommy had started me in dancing lessons when I was 3 years old, because I had trouble walking when I first started to walk, and the doctor said to give me dancing lessons. And you weren't supposed to dance because that was a sin. And you weren't supposed to put nail polish on, that was a sin. And you weren't supposed to play any kind of cards, that was a sin. And you didn't wear makeup because that was a sin. So I guess I was a sinner.
Now, tell me about Uncle Put.
Uncle Warner, he was my dad's younger brother. He was a traveling salesman for Portis Hats, and they had 2 cabins in South Dakota that they stayed at. And he went all over the state selling, and he gave parties for the Indians. And I remember they made him an honorary chief of the Indian tribe, and he had all the Indian leather clothes, and he wore like a cowboy hat, and he was MC at the rodeos. And I remember there was one in Chicago that he took me to, and I had a red hat on with a big red feather, and they were getting these bulls into the arena, and one got loose and started running around the hallway. And I remember hiding behind a pillar, and this bull went right into the men's washroom. And when they finally got the bull out, here this black man came, and he was the whitest black man that I'd ever seen. He was so frightened. And I always remember that.
And what was your life like growing up as an only child?
I can remember sitting on the dining room chair and saying, I wish I had somebody to play with. I wish I had somebody to play with. And I wanted every birthday, every Christmas, I wanted Mommy and Daddy to get a baby for me. And Daddy always said they were too expensive, so I couldn't have a baby sister or brother. And then I guess I've told you this story. When I was 3 years old, I went to the hospital, which was across the street, and I went up to the counter, and the nurse looked down at me and wanted to know what I wanted, and I said I came to put an order in for a baby, little baby sister. And she said, well, they didn't have any little girls then. And I said, well, I'd like to have a little boy then. And she said, well, they didn't have any little boys either. And then I thought for a while, and I thought, well, if you don't have a white one, I'll take a black one. Well, she thought that was cute, so of course she had to go tell my mother. And then I got punished for crossing the street when I wasn't supposed to. And then we were, as I said, I took dancing lessons all my life. Well, not, goodness, not now, but going through school. And there was a Episcopal church down at a block from us, and he had married a chorus girl. And she gave dancing lessons to everybody, so we started taking dancing lessons down there. And he wrote plays, and we'd go to the different orphanages and old people's homes and put on plays that he had written. And I remember I was dressed as a dustpan. It was a kitchen clock, and we were all different parts, utensils in the kitchen. And I was the dustpan, and I had a white outfit on. And before the play started, I laid down on my stomach to pick out which one of the orphans I wanted to adopt. And when I got up, the front of my outfit was all dirty. And so I went down and I met this little girl, and her name was Gertrude. And I remember saying, "Mommy, if we can have her, could we please change your name?" I don't like the name Gertrude. Well, we didn't get to take her home. And
What about your teenage years and Job's Daughters?
when I was 13, I joined Job's Daughters. And the first thing I went to an installation. And most of the girls were from the Czechoslovakia families. They were Bohemians. And Daddy said, "Hope, don't ever expect to be queen," because he said, most all the girls here are Bohemian. And but anyway, I joined, and I did get to be queen. And I was queen in 1941. And then we had a Pass Down at Queens Club that was started in the 30s sometime. And we've had that still going. And they still have the Pass Down at Queens Club. And the daughters of those past queens have formed their own Pass Down at Queens Club. And the mothers have a club, it's called the Mothers of the Pass Down at Queens, that's been going on for all these years now.
Now, that's how you met Aunt Elna,
And-
and then you met Dad.
Yeah, I met Marion Charvat, and Elna and I were very close in Job's Daughters. And so anyway, she had 2 older brothers, and I didn't even know that. But when I was 16, I went down to have my picture taken. And they were down there, and the oldest brother was having his little baby. He was 2 years old then. They were having his picture taken at the same time. And Glenn was standing in the doorway of this photographer studio. And I remember Elna introducing me to Glenn. And he didn't look anything like the rest of the family. But I thought he was real good looking, but that was the end of it. I didn't see him again. And then I saw him later on at a dance. He was looking for one of the older girls. And, but when I guess I was 17. No, I guess I was 16. It was at Christmas, and we wanted to go caroling. And we didn't have a car, but Carlson's had a car, and so Elna wanted to take the car and drive the girls around caroling. And her mom said, "No, not in all this ice and snow. If Glenn wants to take you, it's all right." Well, he didn't want to go down with all those babies. He thought we were all too young for him. And he came and picked me up, and I sat next to him. And when we went home, I was the last one to take home, and he asked me if I'd go out with him, and I said yes. And so we went ice skating the first date, and he was great on ice skates, and I wasn't. But anyway, he asked me if I'd go steady with him after the first date, and I thought that was so strange. But then a month later, he asked me if I'd marry him, and I thought that was the silliest thing. Anyway, I got through school. I was just, I guess I was just 17. I was 17 in April and graduated in June when I got out of high school.
You got out of high school early.
I made it in 3.5 years.
Yeah.
And I made high school in grammar school in 7.5, so I made up 1 year. But anyway, I got out a little early. And so then I was dating Glenn. I went with him for 1.5 years. And that was just before it was during the war. And he was on call to go into the Air Force. And so he always was asking me, when are we going to get married? And he he was going to college all this time that I was dating him. And so I said, how about January 16th? And went to tell Mommy, and she said, Hope, that's so sudden, it's so soon. And I said, well, I've been engaged for 1.5 years, and I never thought how long it would take to prepare for a wedding, but we had 3 weeks. But our stores were only open Monday night, and then it was open on Saturdays, during the week, then Saturday. Sunday, Saturday, it was Christmas. And the next Saturday, it was New Year's, and they were closed. And so we had to do our shopping the one Monday night. I can remember we went in, I bought my wedding gift, a gown, and the girls came, they picked out their outfits, and we did everything in such a big hurry. And he was on a 48-hour call to the Air Force, and I didn't know if I was going to have a bridegroom at the wedding or not. But we had about 250 people, and he was there, and he was home for 7 weeks before he had to leave for service.
Now, where did he go?
And he went down to Boca Raton, Florida for his basic training, and I took my vacation and went down there, and I got to see him. But I always had to get home by midnight, And I thought, boy, when I get married, I could stay out as long as I want. Well, when Glenn got down there, he had to be home at midnight. So he had to take me home by like 11 o'clock to get back to his place by 12. And then I came back, and I started working. When I graduated from junior college, I worked for Commonwealth Edison Company. And I worked there. And then he was sent to Yale University, and I quit my job, and I went to Yale.
Was that to become an officer?
And he was studying to be an officer. And I was there till I went in June, and he graduated the end of October. And I worked there, got a job there. And I got to see him one afternoon from 5 to 6, I'd get to see him. And I can remember it was a lounge that we could meet our husbands, and he'd say, now, we can hold hands, but you can't kiss me. And so then on weekends, sometimes he would get off. But he always had to be back by 12 o'clock, so he'd have to get me home by 11 o'clock to the room where I was renting, and then he'd get back by 12 o'clock.
So you still had your 12 o'clock curfew?
I still had my 12 o'clock curfew. Then we had 1 month before he was sent overseas, and I went down to St. Louis for a week down there, and then he was sent overseas.
To where?
He went to Hawaii first, so I went to see if I could get a job in Hawaii. And he said, no way. He said, I'm not going to be staying here, and you're not going to be in Hawaii here with all these sailors. So I stayed home with Mommy and Daddy while he was overseas. And then he went to Saipan and Okinawa, and Glenn was in service for almost 3 years
What
then.
did he do in the service?
He was a first lieutenant, and he had charge of keeping the airplanes working. He didn't do the flying. He just took the maintenance and care of all the planes. And then Mommy died.
When did your mom pass away?
And then Mommy died during the war.
What did she
I
die
guess
from?
Mommy died she had 6 heart attacks in 3 weeks. And then she died of a blood clot in her lungs.
How old were you when she died?
And I was 22 when Mommy died. And then Marie, it was a couple that Glenn had gone to high school with, Miles, and he was a doctor, and his wife was a nurse, Marie. And so when we were dating, we would double date with them all the time, and we'd play cards and go to the show and everything. And Miles was sent to Europe, and Glenn was sent to the Pacific. So after Mommy died, Marie came to live with Daddy and me. And then Daddy wasn't feeling good after Mommy died, and Mommy died the 1st of March, and by June, he was so sick that he had to quit working. And it was just before his 65th birthday. And Glenn came home the end of October, and Daddy went into the hospital Christmas Eve, and he died of bone cancer. He was in the hospital from Christmas Eve.
know he had bone cancer.
No, they didn't know he had bone cancer. And
So
they didn't give him any kind of pain medication. They said it was he was just grieving from my mother. And he died the 1st of March, too, just exactly a year after Mommy died. I was 23, and I had him perform an autopsy. And he was just eaten up. Everything was eaten up with the bone cancers, lungs, everything. I mean, the ribs and everything. So I always felt so guilty that, we couldn't give him any pain medication. And then Miles came home, and then the two couples lived together in my home there in Berwyn. And we had such a good time, and Miles was my doctor, and he delivered you 3 kids. So it was always Uncle Miles and Aunt Marie, and we were close all those years.
When did you first learn to drive?
When I was 24, we had a car when I was little. It was an Essex. And I can remember how unhappy Mommy would be if Daddy drove 50 miles an hour in it. It was more like a box on wheels. And I remember he sold it for $50. He didn't drive it too much because Daddy worked. He was an engineer, and he went to work at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon and didn't get home till 1 o'clock in the morning. So they didn't use the car very much, but he sold it. And anyway, when Glenn came home from the service, we bought a car, and he taught me how to drive. And I was very pregnant with Gary. And he kept saying, "Turn around and look behind you." And I said, "I can't, I'm stuck behind the wheel." And so we had that car. When I went to get my driver's license, I had to go quite a few towns over to do it, and it was a snowstorm. And when we went out to take the test, we couldn't get the car started because it was on ice, so they had to get like some kind of steel grids or something to put in front of the tires to get the car started. And he said, "Just drive around the block." And I did. He says, "You passed." He said, "If you can drive all the way over here to take your driver's license in this storm, you've passed." So I didn't have to really take a test. But, and then even now, I'll drive along and I'll say, "Oh, Glenn, thank you so much for teaching me how to drive," especially here in California.
I want to ask you 2 more things about your parents. What was your favorite memory with your dad and your favorite memory of your mom?
I guess my dad singing. My dad had a beautiful voice. And when we'd get together with friends and, Aunt Mine and Uncle Elmer and Aunt Florence and Uncle Herman and the kids, and then Aunt Nana, she was my neighbor. She was always my adopted mother. Nana Fisher, she would play the piano, and we'd sing. And Daddy always had such a beautiful, beautiful voice. And Mommy very seldom sang because she never felt she could compete with my dad. But everyone, all the old timers, as soon as they'd get together, they'd all start talking about my daddy's voice.
Well, that's when you got your beautiful voice.
No, not me, Gary. Gary inherited the
You have a
voice, not
beautiful
me.
voice, too. What about inventions in your lifetime that you've
Oh.
seen? What's really stood out
Well,
as far as inventions?
I can remember they delivered the milk with the horse and buggy, and we had the ice box when you put ice in the top, and we had a pan to catch the water. Every day you'd have to empty out the pan underneath so it didn't go all over the floor. And I remember the first time we got a refrigerator. Oh, that was wonderful. Um,
About washing clothes.
we had the when I was little, we had the big oval wash tubs, and you had one to wash it, and they put it on a gas burner, and it would heat the water, and they'd put the clothes in there and stir it with a stick, and then they'd put it in the rinsing water, and then we had a sink right next to it. And then we got the first wash machine was it was just an agitator, wash machine, and then you drain the water into the sink. And I remember we had we burned coal. We didn't have gas heat. We burned coal, and you'd have to go down and put coal in the oven and take the clinkers out. And the big thing was when we got, it's called a stoker. It would automatically feed the coal into the fire, and that was such a blessing.
Didn't that get all over the walls and everything, though?
Yeah, everything got a lot dirtier. You had to wash all your walls every year, and everything had to come down. The ceilings were washed. I mean, when they talked about spring cleaning, you really, you really did spring cleaning.
When did plastic come in?
It came in during the war, or just before, when Glenn was graduating from college. They started in with plastic and the nylon. We had oilcloth before, but no plastic of any kind. And let's see, what else did we? But we all, we had a 4-bedroom home, and we had 2 big bathrooms, which most of the people did not have. If they had 1 bathroom in the house, it was that's all the homes there that I know of. They all had 1 bathroom.
Now, didn't your parents rent rooms too?
And then during the Depression, Mommy and Daddy rented rooms, and I had some, people that I've kept contact with, and one was Lillian Peterson, and she had children my age that were in an
Grandma
orphanage.
Lily?
That was Grandma Lily, and we stayed friends for all these years, and my kids always called her Grandma Lily.
Our mini-skirted Grandma Millie.
Yeah, the one that had such
Lily.
beautiful legs. And I remember she went to the store and she put this, I think it was black and white and red printed dress on, a mini skirt. And Lita took one look at her and she said, "Grandma Lily, if you buy that, I'm going to have to call you Aunt Lily. I can't call you Grandma anymore."
And during the Depression, how did that affect your family? Did you have to go without anything?
Well, that's one of the reasons we rented our rooms, and I never thought about going without. Mommy, sewed so many of my clothes, and Daddy always had a job. They put him back to firing, being a fireman for a while. It affected Aunt Mina and Uncle Elmer because he lost his job. And
Was that when they went to the farm?
no. And they came and they lived with us, and we had a big basement. It was all finished off. So they put a rug down, and they had their living room and their dining room table down there, and we had a refrigerator down there, and they just cooked and ate down there. And then at night, they'd go next door to Nana Fisher's, and they'd sleep upstairs, and she had a bedroom in the attic and in the second floor. So they slept over there at night, and then in the daytime, they'd come down and they'd stay with us.
So Aunt Jean was close to you then, too?
Oh, yeah.
So she's more like your sister?
Oh, yeah, we've always been like sisters. And she moved, I think she was 5 years old when they moved to Norwood Park, and that was 15 miles away. So I didn't see her, that often, and I remember how tickled we were when we could be together.
When did they go out to the farm then?
That was after the war. Anyway, they had, after they moved from our house, they got an apartment over one of the stores on Stanley Avenue, and they were there for a while. And then they lived with Grandma Denker, that was Uncle Elmer's mother, and they lived in the attic there. And they had what do you call it, with a little stove with the isinglass on it. And I can remember it was so much fun sleeping there because you could hear the rain so much, when it rained. And they had their living quarters up in the attic there. And then they bought, after the war, they bought their first house on Harding Avenue in Des Plaines. And they were there until Uncle Elmer always wanted to go to Michigan and get a farm. But Aunt Mina wouldn't leave Mummy. And then after Mummy died, they went to Michigan.
Okay, let me ask you another question. Did you have pets growing up?
I had Muff.
What kind of dog?
He was a poodle. My sister had had a poodle, so they thought that I should have a poodle. And I was 8 years old when I had Muff. And he followed me to school it was this real bad snowstorm on my birthday in April. And he followed me along the walk. I could see him I took a streetcar, and he was on the other side of the railroad tracks trying to keep up with the streetcar. And we never found him after that. He got lost in the snowstorm, and he was 16. He was 8 years old then when I lost him.
Did you have any other pets?
And then I had, oh yes, I had Buddy. That was a little fox terrier. And then I had Uncle Miles's mother had these little dogs. And I went down there, and I didn't know which one to take. And she said, well, why don't you take two? They're small. So I took a black one and a little beige one and took them home. And they were little dogs. And the black one took and pulled the beige one by its tail all over the kitchen, and I didn't like that. So I took the black one back, and I kept the beige one.
Do you remember his name, her name?
What was that one's name? Anyway, he lived when Miles and Marie lived with us. And we played a bridge every night. And they hit a ball, and the fellas would keep throwing the ball in the living room, you know. Oh, he was so good. And then he got into rat poison. We had big dogs that would come up in the back porch, and they would call for him to go out and play. So I let him out in the back, and they got out in the alleyway, and I guess he got into rat poison, and he was so sick. So Glenn was at work, and I called Miles, and Miles closed up his practice because he was a doctor. He closed up his practice and came and took me to the veterinarian. And, oh, Miles was such a love. He took care of us, and Marie took care of me so much after, I just lost Mummy and Daddy when I had Gary, and they just took care of me so much.
So you lived in your mom and dad's house all the time growing up, and when you were first married?
Yeah.
And then when did you
we moved to our first home when Gary was 14 months old, and I was 28 years
Where
old.
was that?
Or wait a minute, was I 28? No, I was 24. I was 24 years old. 25 years old. That we moved to LaGrange Park, and we built a new home there. And then, and then while we were still in my old home, Miles and Marie bought their home, and then Mary Ellen and Jim Jackson rang the doorbell and wanted to know if I had any place for them to stay. So they came and stayed with us, and we played bridge every night.
Is he the one you used to walk around top of the stairs in his
Yeah,
underwear?
yeah. Glenn always wanted everything plain. Plain underwear, plain shirts, plain tie. And Jim would get these wild-looking undershorts. So when he got a new pair of shorts, he'd walk across the where the railing was upstairs, and he'd say, "Hope," and I'd run to see what he wanted, and he'd be up there modeling these real wild underpants. And then I think it was, oh golly, how many years later, they were having their fourth child anyway. I hadn't seen them in years. I went to see them, and he said, "Are you still as stupid as you ever were, Hope?" And I said, "Oh, yes." And I said, "And Jim, do you still wear those wild underpants?" That broke the ice. It was like we didn't have all those years in between us.
And what brought you guys out to California? You and Dad out to California?
Well, Mom wanted to come to California. Ed and Ethel had moved out. It was his older brother and his wife. And they had a little boy. And moved out to California. He started working out in California. So Mom came out to visit, and she loved California, and all she talked about was moving to California, and Dad didn't want to go because they owned this big 13-flat apartment building. And he didn't want to leave Glenn and I. So he said, would you, so anyway, Mom said, well, I'll take the kids if you go out and see if you want to find a job out there. Well, anyway, we went out. First of all, we just went out on vacation. And we stayed with Ed and Ethel, and I just fell in love with California. I loved it. And I remember Bill was about 7 years old. That was their youngest son. And every time we'd go out for a ride to show us California, as soon as we got in the car, he'd say, Hope, let's sing. And we'd sing the whole day long. And then the next year, Mom said, well, now if you want to go back and get a job, I'll take care of the kids. So we went back again. And anyway, Glenn got a job with the utility out here. He'd been with Edison in Chicago for 19 years, but he came out here and he got a job as an engineer here. And we moved to Arcadia and bought a lovely home there.
That was your favorite time, I think.
Yeah, that was my favorite time, when you kids were all little, and I loved Arcadia and being in the foothills of the mountains, and we had such a beautiful big backyard, and I loved Arcadia, still do. And we lived there for 6 years, and then Glenn went with Atomics International, but it was a long ride out to the San Fernando Valley. So after a year of doing that, we went out and we picked out a floor plan, and we went into a house in Woodland Hills, then new home in Woodland Hills.
When did you decide to go into teaching?
Well, Glenn hadn't been well when we were in Arcadia, and he had been real sick. And I thought, what am I going to do if something happens to him and he gets sick and he can't work? And I've got 3 little ones. So as soon as we moved out to Woodland Hills, they were opening up a college there.
What college was that?
That was the San Fernando Valley State College in Northridge. And they were just building that. And there were a lot of orange groves around there. And when we got settled, I started into school there, and I went there for a year and a half. And then Daddy was sent to Nebraska to put up a power plant, electric power plant, or atomic power plant. And we were there for a year and a half.
How'd you like living in Nebraska?
Oh, I liked living in Nebraska, except for the weather. I loved the town, and the people were great. The weather was hot and humid in the summer, and cold and snowy and icy in the wintertime. The only place I ever lived where I had icicles on my eyelashes. And I never got stuck in the snow before I got there. I did that a couple times.
And you were still
And
going to college?
I was still going to college, so I finished up. I went to the Lincoln, the University at Lincoln, Nebraska, and took my.
You used to have to shovel your own parking place.
Oh yeah, in the snow. Yeah, I had to shovel my parking space, and then I had 10 blocks to walk to my first class. Then when I'd get out at night, the car still wouldn't start, and I'd have to call AAA to get me started, to get home. I remember the one Christmas, I was coming home from church by myself, I think. I don't know if you kids were in the car with me, but anyway, I was coming down my street, which was on a hill, and I was going to turn in my driveway, and it didn't turn, and I headed right for my, the neighbor across the street had gotten a new car for Christmas, and it was parked out in front, heading right for that new car. And I don't know how I did it, but I managed to plow into a big snowdrift. And I came in, I was so happy I hadn't hit that car, came in just bubbling. I had I had landed in a snowdrift. Glenn couldn't understand why I was so happy, because he had to he had to go out and dig me out of the snowdrift. But and one time I went down the icy street and I was going to make a turn, and instead of that I ended up in my neighbor's front yard. But the girls the families that were there with us, most of them had never seen snow before or never lived in snow. And being raised in Chicago, they decided that I was supposed to do all the driving when it snowed. But
So you loved Lincoln, and,
I love Lincoln. I love the town.
and then we moved back because we just rented our house out in Woodland
Yeah,
Hills.
we lived in 2 rented places in Lincoln. And,
I remember they were building bomb shelters then,
oh yeah, they had bomb shelters.
but we never had one.
No,
But we had basements.
Yeah, well, yeah, we had, in Chicago we had basements, and there they had basements. We didn't have basements in California, which is why all of our garages out here look like storage sheds. That's where we put all the things we want to store is in the garage.
But you were happy to get back to California.
I was
after you
happy to get,
graduated.
yeah, the people that we rented the house from wanted to buy the house, and we said no, we weren't going to sell it. So we came back, and the kids started back to school, and I had just 6 months left of college. When I was in Nebraska, they had hired me to teach here in L.A., and I told them I still had to finish school, so they said as soon as I was through, I had a job. So then I graduated.
And then where did you start teaching?
And I started teaching at Callahan Street School, which was about 2 blocks from the university, the college there.
And what grade?
And I started teaching 2nd grade. And then the kindergarten teacher had a breakdown, so they put me in the kindergarten classroom, and I taught kindergarten and 1st grade for most of the time. I was there for 20 years. And I started teaching when I was 41 years old.
And how many years did you teach?
20 years.
20 years.
And when I had started back to college, they said, how long has it been since you've been in college? And I said, 19 years. And they said, well, you know, if it's over 20 years, we can't give you credit for any of it. So I was able to take all my credits from junior college.
Oh, that's great.
That was great, yeah.
And you made some good friends while you were teaching.
And I made good friends while I was